423 games. 423 games. That's how many consecutive games the Denver Broncos have sold out. A streak which began in week 1 of the 1970 season, over 52 years ago. It's an NFL record for a single city and includes over 400 regular season games and 22 playoff battles. If you multiply the total number of seats in the current stadium by 423 games, that's almost 32 million seats sold during the past half century. The Dallas Cowboys may be referred to as America's team, but the Denver Broncos are proudly owned by the Rocky Mountain region and have been the crown jewel of entertainment here for the majority of the organization's existence. In this episode of the franchise, Denver Broncos, we look back at the history of Broncos Country, and we dive into what has made the orange and blue so endearing to Denver, the state of Colorado, and the midwestern region of the United States. I'm your host, Super Bowl champion Ryan Harris, and welcome to another episode of the franchise Denver Broncos. Well, this episode is about you, Broncos Country, and I'm so thrilled to be able to bring what it's like to be a fan of the Denver Broncos to the franchise Denver Broncos podcast. I will never forget when you etched yourself in my heart forever after we won the AFC Championship game. It was one of the biggest games I'd ever played in, and what was amazing to me is as we were touching the AFC trophy and passing around that Lamar Hunt trophy, all 70,000 fans stayed in the building screaming their heads off. That is something I will not forget. And to honor you, Broncos Country, we brought some special guests with you. We have the legendary radio personality, Sandy Clough, who has just announced retirement from his multiple decades in sports radio and more. We have Jim Sacamano, Hall of Famer in our midst for his work as the head of PR for the Denver Broncos for over 2 decades. And then we have some legendary fans from Broncos Country, Chase Boswell and David Roth from the famed Broncos bus. So first, gentlemen, I just want to ask the simple question, because I didn't know even as a player what it feels like. And Chase, we'll start with you. What does it feel like to be a Denver Broncos fan at a Broncos game?
It's pretty special, Ryan. It feels like you're part of a community, something that's larger than yourself. And the passion that surrounds that community, that's involved in that community, you don't have to know everybody, but you all know you're cheering for the same team. And that's something that I haven't really found in many other, even other sports. It's just the fervor isn't as sharp or as big in other sports that I've ever been around. So I've always loved being part of Broncos Country. And I remember the first time I got a jacket from my dad when I was about 8 years old, and it was the old bright orange Broncos jacket. And I grew up on John Elway's quarterback, and these were the celebrities to us in Denver. So it was always a joy being around it.
David, how about you?
Well, I think here in Denver, Broncos are probably going to be and have been, one of the most enjoyed franchises. Growing up, we had the Broncos and the Nuggets, and that's why I think there's such a huge Broncos fanfare around our football team, because we aren't a sports market that had a lot of options. Now we do now, but we've really built that the Broncos family because of the lack of pro options. We own a Broncos bus. And being a family like we are, we've got, 20 members, and we go to all these games and we raise money for charity. And just to be involved and to say anything to do with the Broncos is fantastic.
And Sandy, how about you? You're the second youngest Broncos fan. What was it like for you becoming a Broncos fan and then actually getting to work on the Broncos, have the Broncos be a part of your work as a broadcaster?
Well, my work as a broadcaster, whether it was at KOA, K-Big in the early to mid-'90s, or the Fan for the past quarter century, precluded my holding a rooting interest beyond rooting for good stories. And the Broncos always had a wealth of good stories. And I must confess, being human, I rooted for individuals. And the way the Broncos were presented to the media through the work of Jim Sacamano, who is a Hall of Famer in every conceivable respect, made the Broncos not only an easy team to cover, but a fun team to cover. And I worked for the flagship station during my first 11 years in Denver, and it wasn't any more difficult in the ensuing 30 plus years that I've been here to work with people like Jim. Even when I wasn't affiliated with a flagship station, there was no difference in the way I was treated by Jim, no difference in the way I was treated by the players, coaches, ownership along the way. And that made me a fan of the Broncos as an organization, even as I may not have had a strong rooting interest in particular outcomes from game to game and from season to season. I thought the Broncos were always an interesting story, even if they hadn't been as popular as we all know they have been, even during the bad old AFL days. And I say bad old days from a competitive perspective. The Broncos weren't what they have since become as a National Football League franchise. But I found the fans growing ever more sophisticated through the years, and it's been a joy to deal with them. Even now in retirement, I hope to maintain many, if not all, of those relationships.
Now, Jim, you may have the best title for an NFL Films video when it comes out. From fan to pro. You literally were a fan of the Denver Broncos as a young kid. You talked about what it smelled like and the peanuts tasted like walking in. And what I love too, and I didn't know this until researching for this episode, Miles the mascot was one of two official mascots of the Denver Broncos, came in 99, the same year as that second Super Bowl. And then there was also Rocky Mountain Thunder, where the entire east side of the stadium was set on runways that sometimes were covered by water. What was it like to see the evolution of the fan base that is now known as Broncos Country?
You know, it sort of started at the beginning, but not the very beginning. In 1960, the Broncos started, and it was like the things we've seen about Neanderthal man and so forth. I could go on, but oh my goodness, talk about primitive conditions. But Valentine's Day 1965 was when Broncomania was born. The Broncos owners had gotten together and they said, we're losing too much money. Maybe it was $10,000 a guy or whatever. 17 people. We're going to sell to this guy in Atlanta. And this was about the 13th of February, 65. Jerry Phipps asks to be excused, goes across the street to a bank, borrows $1 million, comes back, buys out all of his guys. He owns the Broncos. And then he called the people in Atlanta Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1965, to tell them, no deal, the Broncos are not coming to Atlanta. Now, up until that point, the Broncos season ticket base, and it's all in the media guide, $4,500 a year, $5,200, $6,500, nothing. They had a terrible year the year before. That year, they sell 22,000 season tickets. So to have a terrible product and go from 7,000 or fewer season tickets to 22,000, and that was when this attendance, now Bear Stadium seated 35, but that was you started to have 35, 34, 33, 35, 34. Then you expanded and so forth. Starting in 1970, the sellout streak began. And I could go on, and at some point, maybe I'll get a chance to. I do want to be able to talk about the Denver Broncos quarterback club, which is a booster club. So, yeah. But in this case, the guy who started it was a passionate fan who also started Orange Sunday at his own expense. So whenever you're watching a game now and you see it's Blackout Tuesday and the team's wearing all black, or they gave out pink handkerchiefs before the game, the terrible towel, these were all offshoots of Charlie Goldberg giving out the orange placards or bandanas that it was Broncos Country.
Well, I love it. Charlie Goldberg. I think of Bronco Betty. She was somebody who after every game, whatever time it was, we got back to the facility, she'd be screaming, "I love you guys! I love you guys!" And it was just something amazing. She'd be at every training camp practice. And then, of course, everybody knows Barrel Man. The History Colorado Center actually has the Barrel Man outfit in as a display. Now, he passed due to lung disease at age 69 on December 5th of 2009. but that's just a couple of the personalities that are many as Broncos fans. And Chase and David, you briefly mentioned the Bronco bus, but I want to go back to that. Because as a player, I would see it all the time driving in, and I'm like, man, I think I could go in there and get some food. Probably not the right look before a game. But what made you guys start the Bronco bus?
So when we were just coming out of college, that was when we won the back-to-back Super Bowl championships, and we grew up loving this team, had been wanting that taste of victory for so long, and we finally had it. And I remember we came back after graduating, and we were at our favorite burger joint, the Cherry Cricket, and there was about 6 of us sitting at a table, and we said, hey, what would be fun is if we bought a van and we all went down to games together and kind of did our normal thing. And we started writing down names of the people we wanted to include, and we realized we were going to need a much bigger van. And so we started looking around at buses, and they weren't that easy to come by back then. You didn't have Google or anything yet, so it wasn't really easy to go look on Craigslist for any of these things. But we did. I was at lunch with my friend Jeter, and we were sitting there, and we had found one in Indiana. We were going to fly out to Indiana and drive this thing back. And I didn't think that was the right idea just because it was so far. I wasn't sure the bus was going to make it back. And Jeter said, I don't think we're going to find one here. So we kind of agreed to disagree and left the restaurant. We walk outside, and a bus rolled by down 17th Avenue. We were downtown Denver, and it said, want to buy a bus, and it had a phone number. And so we went out to this lot. Yeah, so we call the number. We go out to this lot, and they had, maybe 60 old school buses that were kind of all out of the school systems. And there was, they were all in like early 80s kind of buses. And then there was this one, and it was kind of like the scene in Christmas Vacation when you see the light over the Christmas tree, the Griswold's going to cut down. There was just it was like shining, and it was like a 1990. It was like the newest one on the lot. And so we paid the guy $2,500 for it. They painted it bright orange for us as a courtesy because they love what we were doing. And again, that goes back to that community piece, Ryan, where it's just like they heard what we were trying to do, and they almost gave it to us. They were excited that we were going to go do it. We had a big party and started out. We stenciled on the Broncos bus on the side and with some blues paint, and we've since had a couple more upgrades in the paint job and things like that. But it was really fun. And I remember the first game we went to, we were in the north lot, and we had all of our friends there, and it was like the birth of something great. Like you could feel it. Like it was like, oh yeah, we're going to be doing this for a while. And you fast forward, almost 20 years, and here we are, and most of us have kids, and now our kids are out there playing beanbags that we used to be playing, and we're cooking burgers for them instead of for just us. And it's been an evolution. It's been an honor and a privilege, and it's just been such a cool thing to rally around. And again, we all love this team so much, and we've been there in the hard times and in the great times. And there's been some highlights. I remember when we were playing the Ravens one year, and I'll let David speak on this a little too, but we basically had a bunch of purple feathers that we had splattered on the kind of the front of the bus as if we had driven over a giant raven on the way to the game. When we were playing the Steelers in the playoffs one year, we had a fake Jerome Bettis stuck on the front of the bus, so it's kind of like a bus meets bus type of competition.
Nice.
And over the years, we got more and more involved with the Broncos. They liked what we were doing. We were always raising money for charity and giving it to local charities. So whether it was for flood victims in Boulder when that happened, or if it was different what are now kind of Denver Bronco charities, we've kind of covered them all. But it's always local, and it's always heartfelt. We've done stuff for our troops and everything like that. And that's the fun part. We're rallying around, we're having fun, but we're doing something that's greater than ourselves, and that's what we love about it.
Love it. And David, what game do you remember? I mean, I bet those parties changed for you guys from when you were fresh out of college to them bringing the kids. We won't talk about those chapters, but what are some of the memorable tailgates you remember there on the Broncos bus, David?
Yeah, Ryan, I think that is safe to assume us in our early, mid, late 20s was some pretty wild times. So one of the games I remember is we all wore plumber mustaches, that terrible handlebar mustache, the Hulk Hogan or Sam Elliott and Tombstone mustaches. So I went to the the Wizard's Chest, another Denver institution, and I got fake mustaches for everyone. Even the ladies were wearing these plumber stashes. We had
Even the bus had a stash.
Yeah, a big orange mustache, the bus stash. So that was for one of those games. I was a huge Plumber fan. I used to go to all of the games, and it was kind of during the Flavor Flav time. I don't know if you remember his goofy reality shows, but I had a giant clock that had Plumber on it, and it was Plumber time, and everyone, Plumber time, Plumber time, Plumber time. I think another one of really cool games we had was, I think it was a Giants game, but we had a full Thanksgiving dinner outside of the bus. We had all the tables and families got together. And that's another thing as it's grown, it has turned from something to where it was, really fun and bonding in terms of guys. And now the bus has evolved so much to where it's now a family institution, and it's something we're going to hopefully pass down to our kids as they get older. So then, they can be included in the debauchery just like we were in our young 20s.
So someday they'll steal the keys from you and park the car early. You'll have to find them at the parking lot. I pray for you in those days. But each of us here are football fans. And I found, young kid growing up in St. Paul, Minnesota, John Randall was the reason why I became a football fan. He's painting his face black and things like that, and was just relentless getting after the quarterback. And let's start with you, Jim, because as one of the most seasoned fans, literally in seasons of play, I mean, what players do you think about? I'll ask each of you for three. Just rattle off three of the players that you think about that are your favorites when it comes to Denver Broncos history.
John Elway, Peyton Manning, and I'm not sure who the number 3 guy is. I think I might say Randy Gradishar. These are great players, Hall of Famers, and should be a Hall of Famer. And they symbolized why the fans, the team has been here for 6 decades, into 7. But Elway was here for 16 years. Manning for 4, Gradishar for 10. You add these up, and every city has these things. But if they don't, that's too bad for them. But they have a guy who's special, who's part of the community. And I might add, each of these guys is still a part of the Denver community. You see them around doing things and so forth. That's a big deal. Anybody has a right to do anything in America. But if somebody plays someplace, then they go to live someplace else. That's fine. But it's understandable that as time goes by, they're not regarded by the old fans in the same way. But if you stay here, you certainly are, as you know, Ryan.
Absolutely. Well, and even Rod Smith, a favorite of many Broncos fans, he joined me for Economic Literacy Colorado's Financial Literacy Night to increase financial literacy in the Denver metro area and beyond. I mean, really outstanding, high-character people have been throughout the Broncos' history. Sandy, how about your 3 favorite players?
I have more than 3 favorites, but since you're limiting it to just 3, I can't disagree with Jim on any of his 3, but I'll try to be a little bit different. I think John Elway has to be at the top of the list. I'm referring now to figures who are here for a significant period of time and made an imprint during the period in which the Broncos not only became an institution here in Denver, they were an institution long before they became successful, but that the presence of people like Randy Gradishar and Billy Thompson, for me, I have to go with John Elway, because Billy Thompson and Randy Gradishar were around for the bad old days. Billy, even during his rookie year, spent his first season in the final year of the American Football League. So Billy goes back to the AFL. Floyd Little, I'd love to include Floyd on this list, but boy, if you've got to have John Elway, who's the greatest player in franchise history and maybe one of the great football players in the history of the game. If you're talking about a top 5 list of football players, regardless of position, for me, John Elway's got to be on it. And Billy and Randy came around at a time when the Broncos had an image competitively of being losers. And the Broncos are transformed into winners and remained winners long after Billy and Randy retired. But Billy and Randy, along with Lewis Wright and, of course, Floyd Little, they had a lot to do with defining the Broncos as the class organization they remain to this day.
I love it. I love it. And great anecdotes there as well. And I agree. It's hard to limit it to three. David, go ahead. Your limited three favorite, maybe not the best Broncos of all time, but your favorite Broncos of all time.
Well, I hate to bury the lead. You already heard me say Jake Plummer. I'm going to put Jake Plummer on there. I think I might have been one of his biggest fans. I know he wasn't, he's not up there in the echelon. Jake Plummer. I got to go next to my man, Mark Jackson, who I've actually worked with. I've hugged. He is a hilarious man. He is very caring. He's intelligent. I just, and what a hell of a receiver. He was in, obviously everyone knows he was at the end of the drive. I can't believe you guys didn't get him on your Three Amigos episode. And I'm going to go with my man. I must own 3 or 4 jerseys from him, Von Miller. This is a guy who is just an amazing athlete, and we're going to see he is going to have a Super Bowl ring from at least 3 teams, if not 4, by the time he resigns.
And he's coming for that NFL Super Bowl sack record, just a half sack away. The person who holds it, I believe, is a former Cowboy, and it took him 5 Super Bowls to set that record. Vaughn will be appearing in just his 3rd and have a chance to break it if he gets there this year with the Bills, who look mighty, mighty good. And it's funny, too, with Vaughn, I think he's the rare player where when he leaves, the fan base still cheers for him. I think that is so rare in NFL history to have a fan that is so good, or a player, that is so good, so impactful, that fans still root for their success when they leave. But, Chase, let's get to your 3. Who are your 3 favorite Broncos?
Well, I'll go ahead and agree with Sandy that you got to have Elway somewhere in the list, but I'm going to choose 3 different ones. But I just want to preface it that Elway's number 1 in my book for any player for Broncos all time.
Elway's number 1. Elway's number 1.
Yeah. So I would go with Terrell Davis. I mean, the story of kind of, the Tokyo game, how he kind of came onto the scene, and then the records he set. And, this is a guy that started the Mile High Salute for the most part. And he backed it up. Everything he did, he was transformative, and I think that's what got us from being near the top to over the top. And I'll always appreciate watching him run so hard. The 2,000-yard season, all those memories I'll always think of fondly. I think in that same time frame, you got Shannon Sharp. I mean, this is a guy I remember watching him Elway duck under a blitz in Seattle, and he streaking down the middle of the field as a tight end and just chucks it to him. And I mean, Shannon was a difference maker every year he was on our squad. And it was tough watching him leave, but it was even cooler seeing him come back. And so I always loved Shannon. I thought he was way before his time. Like he kind of set the new bar for tight ends, it seemed like. And then you had a bunch of other guys follow in his footsteps. And then Atwater, I mean, the Okoye hit, and not just that, but I mean the saves he made in KC in the playoffs and things that he did against Green Bay. He ever present. He was everywhere. It just seemed like he was all over the field, and he delivered the hits. I mean, it was impressive. He got the ball loose almost every time, so it's really fun to watch that as well.
I love it, Jason, and all of you. I mean, I'll set the guys that I didn't play with. I mean, when you watch Terrell Davis, like Chase, you said, I mean, the Mile High Salute, just the orange kind of coming down the side of the leg, too. That was just so cool when I was younger. And I just kept thinking, how is he doing this? How is he running so much? They know what he's going to do. And Shannon Sharp, what a legendary call. Call the National Guard.
Yeah,
I mean, come on, man. That changed smack talk for the rest of the NFL history.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you got Von Miller, one of the key players in our Super Bowl 50 run. John Elway as well. But I'll tell you guys, for me as a player, some of my favorites to play with, DeMarcus Ware, Peyton Manning, both of those guys were just unbelievable, selfless leaders. And then I'm going to throw another one at you guys you might not expect. Daniel Graham, one of my favorite teammates of all time, and he was a monster as a tight end. Really, really fun to play with. So those are my 3. Now, each of you guys brought up John Elway. Let's start with you, Chase, and work our way around. Just one memory you have of John Elway and a play or a game that really stuck out to you as a part of Broncos country.
I mean, I got to go with the helicopter. I mean, it was one of the most emotional feelings I've ever had as a fan in even in life. It was just, you just saw a man that was determined, and he knew it was at stake, and he gave his all, and he was going to give it up, and no matter what it took, he was going to get that first down. And so I think that kind of really embodied like how he played throughout his career, and it was cool because it was later in his career, so it was no longer the mobile John Elway that we all kind of grew up watching when he was younger, but he wanted it so bad. He had been there, and he had been so close so many times, and he was willing to just give it all to get over the top there.
I love it. Jim Sacamano, how about you?
All I can think of when you talk about a favorite John Elway moment is a wedding in Appleton, Wisconsin. We were there to play a Monday night game, and we were staying in Appleton, going to play the Packers. And as you know, the production meetings happen on when you get there. The TV crew is set up in a room, and you bring in key players, and they ask them questions. And Elway went first, and so he's going to his room last. Meanwhile, there's a wedding down the hall. Wedding down the hall. So this bridesmaid comes. Oh, I understand John Elway's in this room. Could he please come take a picture with the bride and groom? No, I said. He's here for a game, etc., etc. Please, no. Meanwhile, John Elway comes out of the room. Please. No. I said, he's got to go to his room. John Elway gets on the elevator, presses the button, so the elevator is gone. It's gone. He's escaped. Pretty soon the elevator opens up again, and John says, "Where's this wedding?" The point is, he didn't have to do that. That was something about John Elway, the man. It had nothing to do with the coaches. It had nothing to do with me. It had nothing to do with anything except John Elway, who didn't want to disappoint these people. I later saw the pictures, by the way. They couldn't have been prouder. Here's this bride and groom with Elway in the middle. And the chests are pumped out, and they're so proud. But I thought, you say, well, that's a stupid memory. It tells me what Elway was as a guy, and he was like that all the time. He was something.
Sandy, how about? Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I could give you a zillion on the field, but we'll just leave it at that.
I love that story, though. I had no idea either. I mean, and I know what it's like preparing for a game. I don't care what time it is, what time of year it is. It's tough to step out for a minute, but that's amazing. Sandy, how about you on a John Elway memory?
Oh, I have a lot of them. Jim gave a very personal story, which I've heard Jim tell before, and Jim is the best storyteller I've ever been around. So I won't try to match him with anything personal. But for me, the most remarkable sports atmosphere I was ever a part of in person, and I'm talking about in my life, I just turned 65 years of age. The most remarkable atmosphere for a game of consequence was the AFC Championship game in Cleveland between the Broncos and the Browns on January 11th, 1987. And I remember the entire weekend, the experience as a broadcaster for me. Even the Super Bowl wins that I was around with the Broncos in the 1990s couldn't surpass it. And then on Cleveland's day, in Cleveland's year, with Cleveland leading 20-13 and time running out in the fourth quarter, the Broncos get the ball on a kickoff. Cleveland had just scored to go ahead 20-13. And they mess up the kickoff. The drive starts at the 2-yard line and becomes known forever as the drive. Not just locally either. You say to National Football League fans, hey, do you remember the drive? They know exactly what you're talking about. It can't be about anything or anyone but the Broncos and that drive in Cleveland that John Elway engineered. And Jim, I'm sure, will agree with me. We saw the full breadth of John Elway's brilliant talents on display during that one drive, with mud caked on the back of his uniform and on his pants from the conditions at Cleveland Stadium, and driving into the dog pound with all that, and at one point reaching a 3rd and 18 situation and converting the first down And of course, the bullet pass to Mark Jackson, who's been mentioned earlier here today. And it was just a magnificent thing for me to see a great player come of age in one moment on one drive and never again be doubted by anyone sane as a championship caliber quarterback who could summon up his best at the biggest moments. And of course, his comebacks had already gotten some attention, but this was the comeback to end all comebacks. The Broncos, of course, go on to win the game in overtime. John makes another pass to set up the field goal that's just magnificent. And I remember about that game for 3.5 quarters. Both John Elway and Bernie Kosar were actually fairly ordinary. Kosar threw multiple interceptions. John wasn't having his best day, and everything was pointing to a Cleveland win. And that's when you know that there's greatness in your midst, when you beat somebody in their year. And it wasn't the end of John Elway's bedeviling the Cleveland Browns and their fans. It was only the true beginning, I suppose, of that. But that's the moment I'll never forget. And for one play, I agree on the whirlybird or the helicopter play. That was a matter of John Elway demonstrating his will to win in an unmistakable way. But for me, it's always got to be the drive.
Well, and just real quick before we get to you, David, I mean, even playing in the Brown Stadium, the new Brown Stadium, every year we played there that we did when I was a Bronco, you know, people have signs up that said the drive sucked or like there was penalties, you know. I mean, it's just like, I mean, just decades later, fans still hadn't let it go. So you're absolutely right,
well,
Sandy.
The Cleveland Browns would still exist today as they existed in 1986 if the Cleveland Browns had won that football game and gone to the Super Bowl, even if they had been routed. And, of course, there was a disappointment the next year too. But although John played a much better game, the story of that game was, of course, the Ernest Miner fumble. But I remain convinced to this day that the Cleveland Browns never would have left for Baltimore had they beaten the Broncos that day in the AFC Championship.
How about that? How about that? John Elway, so good, he sent the Browns packing. That's amazing. David, your favorite John Elway play as we start to wrap up this episode?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, John Elway is the top. Elway Fist is the name of all my fantasy teams because there's nothing less that I would want to be punched in the face with. So don't get me wrong, Elway's at the top. I threw those other 3 guys in there just to be interesting. We wouldn't have any of those stories. We wouldn't have the drive. We wouldn't have the helicopter. We wouldn't have the Jim's awesome wedding story if it weren't 1983 and John Elway didn't have cojones the size of, basketballs to say, you know what? I'm not playing for the Baltimore Colts. I'm not playing for Frank Kush. Yeah. I'm going to go play baseball, which gave us the opportunity to grab him. He didn't want to go to Baltimore. He wanted to come to Denver, this cow town, this dusty old spot on the map. And that's really when all this history started. So I got to say it was him and his dad's, gumption to keep this rolling and not to play for the Colts.
Amazing. Now, last question I have for you guys, and it's something I always wondered. Do fans compete with other fans? Now, I want to start with you, Chase, because, you see Barrel Man, Bronco Betty, there's the Wookiees that are Broncos fans, all kinds of stuff. But specifically, you had some amazing situations. Barrel Man lost a bet. Rich Goins, my good friend, he had to be on a billboard because he said he bet the San Diego station that the 3-5 Broncos would beat the Chargers. He lost that bet, was up there on Colfax Avenue for 33 days until the Broncos won again. So, I mean, just let's take Rich Goins and G-Man's billboard, okay? I mean, Chase, what were you thinking when you saw that? And then I want to get on the inside to you, Jim, as you were on the team. But, Chase, what were you thinking as a fellow avid fan of the Broncos when you saw G-Man and heard everything he was doing, saw him on Entertainment Tonight up on that billboard?
Well, I'll say this. In a couple of words, I looked up to him. both literally and figuratively. I mean, I thought it was the coolest. It just added this mystique, right? Where I was just like, wow, like that guy, like he is the ultimate diehard. Like that guy's really putting his money where his mouth is, and I was envious. I was just like almost jealous. I was like, how do I get into this? How do I make my stamp on, the Broncos history like that? Because it's something that I remember very vividly, and I'll never forget.
And Jim, what about hearing about this crazy guy sitting on a billboard from the building? How did you hear about G-Man's situation, and what were the Broncos saying internally for those 33 days?
I don't know how I heard about it, but we knew it was just one more example of how passionate our fan base was. This was one guy, but he represented millions of fans, Broncos fans, who I'm not saying they all wish they could have been on a billboard because they have lives and so forth, but they all admired what he was doing, what Rich Goins was doing. And in that regard, just like one fan represents many, many, well, he represented Broncos Country really on that billboard. It was very, very cool.
That's amazing. Sandy, as a broadcaster, did you feel like you had to do something outlandish when G-Man got up there? Or were you happy to not be sleeping on a billboard?
Very happy not to be sleeping on a billboard for a month. But I thought from a quasi-journalistic perspective, it was very interesting because it spoke to the standard that the Broncos had set. And no team can live up to its highest standards all the time, but it reflected, I think, a certain passion that I don't think you'd see anywhere else. I don't think you'd see it in the bigger markets, the markets smaller than Denver. I don't think you'd ever see anything like that play out. And he was good to his word. He was not coming down until the Broncos won a game. And he was up there for a while. It was one of those years it wasn't successful, one of those few years in the Pat Bowlen era that wasn't successful. But it spoke to the passion and I think the clear feeling of fans by then that as the owner and the organization expected achievement, so did the fans. And if there was no achievement, this particular individual, and I know Rich pretty well, he was willing to stick it out. I don't think he enjoyed being up there quite as long as he was, but he was acting in a sense on principle, and he wasn't going to come down one day or 1 minute before the Broncos won a football game.
And David, what do you remember about G-Man sitting up there on that billboard?
So I remember, like the Broncos, Lewis and Florwack show was one of the most, iconic radio shows to come to Denver. It's just as Denver as the Broncos. Those two personalities are only just below Mr. Sandy, who, sir, congratulations on the retirement. You have one of the most memorable voices and insight into Denver sports. So I just want to say that G-Man was a guy who came on to the Lewis and Florwack show, our morning drive time. And he made that bet. And my brother and I, we would listen to that as we went to school. And we made my dad actually drive us there to West Colfax so we could honk in our old 1980s Volvo station wagon and wave at G-Man as we drove underneath it. So it really was special. And, I actually got to witness that.
Well, I got to witness many of the fervor opportunities that Broncos fans took to show their passion. And I was a part of Steelers Nation, Chiefs Nation, and down there in Houston while I was there. But I can tell you with the fact that no one brought the thunder like Broncos Country's fans in Mile High Stadium. It was something that in all my years playing at Notre Dame, I'd never heard in any other NFL stadium I played in. I'd never heard such noise that you could literally feel on the field as a player. The ground shaking, the noise getting louder. And I also will never forget walking out to the field for pregame warm-ups on Super Bowl 50 and realizing that even in San Francisco that we were playing in a home game. Thank you guys for joining us, and thank you to all of Broncos Country for your passion and your expectations. That is a big part of why the Denver Broncos are one of the greatest teams in the NFL. As always, be sure to give our show a rating, review it, and share it with your friends. Once again, the franchise Denver Broncos is a production of Truth Plus Media, and I'm your host, Super Bowl 50 champion Ryan Harris. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to you joining us for another episode soon.